I froze as I stared at the signed documents lying on my desk, my daughter's smug grin reflected in the polished surface. What the hell just happened? She had taken control of the company I spent decades building. Vanessa, my own blood, had convinced the board to transfer authority to her. My chest burned with anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. The room felt smaller, heavier, as though it was closing in on me. I gritted my teeth, trying to steady my trembling hands. She doesn't know what she's done. My phone buzzed with a congratulatory message she had sent herself through a friend. I wanted to scream, to shout, to grab her, but I remained silent, letting the shock anchor me. My mind raced through every possible reaction. I had raised her, guided her, and trusted her implicitly. And now she had stabbed me in the back, smiling as she did. The title of this nightmare spun in my head. My daughter thought she could steal my empire. She was dead wrong. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. I needed clarity, not anger. My name is Harvey Dalton. I am 55, self-made, and I had just been betrayed by the one person I loved most. And yet, I realized something. Betrayal was not the end. It could be the beginning of my revenge. If you want me to write more stories like this, hit the subscribe button. Then comment the state and city you are watching from. I sank into my chair, my hands trembling as I stared at the papers that now symbolized betrayal. How could she do this? How could Vanessa, the girl I had raised, orchestrate the takeover without even telling me? A flashback hit me, decades ago, sitting in a cramped office with nothing but a vision alone and sheer determination. I had built the company brick by brick, sacrificed weekends, sleepless nights, and even personal happiness. All for this empire, this life, this legacy. And she had walked in and tried to steal it with a few signatures. My anger burned hotter than I had ever felt. The betrayal was personal. A knife to the heart sharper than any business loss. I imagined confronting her, slamming my hand on the desk, yelling her name. Instead, I remained still, quietly calculating. She might have won a small battle, but I would win the war. Just then, I caught a reflection through the glass office wall. She laughed, a slow, taunting smile, unaware that I had already started noticing her patterns, her arrogance, and the tiny mistakes she was making. I whispered to myself, "You have no idea, Vanessa. You've just started a fight you cannot finish." I decided I had to confront my wife, Marlene, to understand if she had any part in this. I found her in the kitchen, sipping coffee as though nothing had happened. My voice shook when I asked, "Did you know about this?" She avoided my gaze and muttered, "I didn't want to see you get in the way of Vanessa's ambitions." Every word was a dagger. My own wife, quietly complicit. My anger flared, a mix of betrayal and disbelief. I had trusted them both completely. All my years of effort, all my sacrifices, reduced to this, a quiet mutiny in my own family. I felt a wave of sorrow, realizing my daughter wasn't acting alone. Yet, amid the hurt, a seed of determination took root. If they thought I would fold, they were mistaken. I needed a plan, a strategy, patience, and timing. I couldn't allow my emotions to cloud my judgment. I spent the evening quietly observing Vanessa from the living room window. She didn't see me there, laughing as she spoke on the phone about her next victory. I noted every detail, every gesture, every hint of arrogance. I realized then that I wasn't defeated. Far from it. They were walking into a trap. They didn't even suspect. The next morning, Vanessa announced a company decision that would directly undermine loyal employees who had stood by me for decades. I watched from a distance as some of my most trusted staff hesitated, unsure of whether to challenge her. My heart sank, but I refused to let despair take over. I knew I had allies. I just needed to find them. After the board meeting, one longtime employee, Frank, pulled me aside, his eyes wide and concerned. "Mr. Dalton," he whispered, "some of us have noticed what she's doing. We're willing to help, but quietly." Relief mingled with a rush of strategy. I realized that while Vanessa had momentum, she underestimated my influence, my loyalty, and my experience. The betrayal cut deep, yes, but now it became a challenge I would relish. Over the next few days, I observe her closely, her decisions, her arrogance, her blind spots. I noted the employees she overestimated and those she dismissed. Every detail mattered. My plan began to form like a careful puzzle, each piece strategically positioned. By the end of the week, I had rallied a small circle of confidants. Together, we would ensure that my daughter's premature triumph would crumble. She had taken my empire, yes, but she had not taken my resolve. I spent the weekend quietly analyzing Vanessa's maneuvers. I realized she relied too heavily on charm and superficial gestures, thinking loyalty could be swayed with compliments or promises. My team and I started testing the waters, planning small, controlled suggestions to gauge reactions without revealing my hand. One by one, we noticed cracks, her impatience, her reliance on flattery, her underestimation of long-term alliances. The thrill of the long game filled me with cautious excitement. I wasn't rushing. Every step was calculated. On Monday, Vanessa threw a lavish company event, assuming she would showcase her control and cement her influence. I attended, uninvited yet unrecognized as a threat. Her public display of confidence made her vulnerable. She underestimated me completely. I stayed calm, smiling politely to others, listening, noting, waiting. One small misstep, a wrong fact she presented to a client, became a seed for future leverage. By the time she realized the quiet murmurs of doubt among employees, it was too late. I had begun reclaiming subtle control, invisibly, without ever confronting her directly. My heart raced, but I maintained my composure. Revenge didn't need anger. It needed patience. And patience, I realized, would taste far sweeter than any impulsive retaliation. The gala was the perfect setting to observe her in action. Vanessa moved through the crowd with calculated charm, expecting admiration and compliance. She didn't notice how employees whispered, questioned her choices, or glanced at me with subtle recognition. I approached a few, offering quiet reassurance and guidance. Her authority was beginning to fracture in ways she could not yet perceive. The thrill of strategic maneuvering coursed through me. She announced a major project that, if executed poorly, could cost the company a significant client. I had already assessed the risks and noted the weaknesses in her plan. I spoke to the client personally, subtly guiding them away from potential disaster without exposing her errors publicly. Vanessa, unaware, believed she was in full control. That night, I left the gala quietly, my mind racing with possibilities. The first cracks had appeared in her armor, but the real battle was only beginning. The question was not if I would strike back. It was when and how much patience I could muster to make her fall the hardest. A week later, the tension in the office was palpable. Vanessa tried to assert dominance over a group of senior employees, publicly questioning their loyalty to me. I had observed this arrogance countless times and used it to my advantage. I quietly orchestrated a scenario where her decisions were questioned politely by staff, planting seeds of doubt without revealing my strategy. One employee, hesitant but loyal, subtly challenged her assumptions during a meeting. The look on her face was priceless. Confusion, irritation, and panic all mingled in her eyes. My patience was paying off. By remaining calm, collected, and morally upright, I had created a controlled environment in which her mistakes would naturally surface. I spent the evening reviewing her decisions, preparing for subtle interventions that could not be traced directly to me. Vanessa believed she had power, but in reality, she was walking a tightrope built of her own arrogance. Every choice she made now gave me more leverage, more insight, and more opportunity for a controlled, satisfying reversal. My heart was steady, my mind sharp, and my resolve absolute. At home, I tried to process the personal side of betrayal. Seeing my daughter's name on the documents, knowing my wife had quietly sided with her, and realizing the years of trust had been broken, it was almost unbearable. But grief was not a strategy. I reflected on everything I had taught Vanessa: patience, respect, the importance of relationships. Ironically, those lessons now worked against her. I could see the patterns, predict her next moves, and, with careful planning, ensure that she would never have full control. That night, I made a list: allies, weaknesses, and opportunities. The betrayal was sharp, but it was now a tool, a fuel for the fire of my methodical response. Every time I felt anger rise, I channeled it into strategy. I knew the fight ahead would be long and deliberate. I also knew it would be satisfying. Vanessa had underestimated me, and that was her first mistake. By the time she realized the depth of her error, it would be far too late to recover. I sought guidance from a retired mentor, someone who had survived decades of corporate battles and family conflicts. We met in his quiet study, surrounded by old books and photographs. I explained Vanessa's takeover attempt, the betrayal, and the stakes. He listened carefully, nodding. "Harvey," he said, "revenge is strongest when calculated. Patience, alliances, and timing never rush. Let her mistakes build, and strike only when the path is clear." His words resonated. I realized that the most satisfying victories were never impulsive. They were precise, earned, and morally righteous. I left his home feeling reinvigorated, understanding that my approach had to be methodical. I would reclaim my empire step by step, quietly, without compromise on my principles. Every action would be deliberate, every observation recorded. Vanessa believed she had won, but she had just stepped into a labyrinth she could not escape. I smiled quietly to myself. Her downfall had begun, and she had no idea. By the next Monday, I had begun testing subtle interventions, minor suggestions to employees, careful guidance in meetings, and discreet encouragement toward loyalty slowly shifted momentum. Vanessa noticed minor changes. Hesitation here, questioning there, but couldn't identify the source. Her frustration grew, though she tried to mask it behind a confident facade. One employee, emboldened by my quiet influence, openly challenged her flawed proposal during a planning session. Her shock was almost visible. That evening, I reviewed each interaction, noting her reactions, weaknesses, and blind spots. The thrill of the slow, control buildup was intoxicating. She had underestimated me, assuming I would respond emotionally or quit. Instead, I had started reclaiming control piece by piece, turning the betrayal into a carefully orchestrated plan. The first wave of my counterattack had begun, unseen, unstoppable, and morally untouchable. Vanessa had believed she could take my empire, but she had not counted on my patience, loyalty, or strategic mind. I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. The storm she had begun would not be hers to control. It would be mine. Vanessa thought she had cornered me with a major company decision. She had pushed a risky partnership, confident it would remove me from the equation entirely. I watched quietly as her plan unfolded, every step revealing cracks she hadn't anticipated. Employees whispered doubts, investors hesitated, and her overconfidence blinded her to warnings that I had quietly issued. My heart thudded, not from fear, but anticipation. I knew that every miscalculation she made was another step toward her undoing. Late that evening, I called a meeting with my closest confidants, reviewing every detail and identifying the moments when her arrogance would betray her. Patience was the key, and I had more than enough. Vanessa thought she could win through speed, charm, and pressure. She had ignored loyalty, insight, and experience, my experience. As I reviewed the paperwork and timelines, a sense of calm overtook me. She had underestimated the value of strategic observation. Each tiny mistake she made was like a puzzle piece falling into place. By the end of the night, I knew exactly how to proceed. She had taken my empire, yes, but I had already begun the work of reclaiming it. The first wave of her defeat was quietly set in motion, invisible yet unstoppable. I spent the next morning reflecting on my life and the sacrifices that had built the empire Vanessa now tried to claim. Nights without sleep, weekends spent negotiating deals, and countless personal sacrifices flashed through my mind. Anger and hurt mingled, but I forced them into focus, turning emotion into strategy. My allies came to me discreetly, sharing small insights about her missteps. Some had witnessed her overconfidence. Others noted her careless promises. Each detail added to a growing map of weaknesses I could exploit ethically and effectively. I reviewed her communications, noticing subtle contradictions and overpromises. I realized she had no backup plan beyond her charm. That vulnerability would be her undoing. I made notes, organized timelines, and quietly began setting up contingencies. She believed she was racing ahead. In reality, she was walking into a controlled trap. That night, I went home, exhausted but energized, knowing that the battle was no longer just about numbers or influence. It was about principle, patience, and timing. Vanessa had underestimated my resolve and my understanding of human nature. I was ready for the slow, methodical reclaiming of my empire, step by step, error by error, all while maintaining my moral integrity. The quiet counterattack began with subtle shifts in daily operations. I guided employees discreetly, strengthening loyalty through encouragement rather than coercion. Vanessa noticed hesitations among her supposed allies, but she couldn't pinpoint the cause. One employee quietly challenged her in a planning session, revealing flaws in her strategy. Vanessa was visibly rattled, though she masked it with forced confidence. That small crack was all I needed. I focused on long-term influence rather than immediate confrontation. Observing Vanessa's behavior revealed more than just arrogance. It showed impulsivity, a desire for immediate recognition, and a disregard for nuanced relationships. These traits would ultimately lead her astray. Over the next week, I reinforced trust with my team, offering quiet mentorship, subtle corrections, and opportunities for them to shine. This built a network of loyalty that Vanessa could not penetrate. Her over-reliance on appearances and charm became increasingly evident. I documented every action, every error, every misstep, knowing that patience would allow the evidence to align in my favor naturally. The excitement of strategic, ethical victory coursed through me. I wasn't just waiting for her to fail. I was shaping a future where her arrogance would undo itself. She had underestimated my calm, my insight, and my allies' loyalty, and that miscalculation would define the next chapters of this battle. Vanessa's first major public failure occurred at a client presentation. She had promised flawless execution of a project I had once led successfully. I had anticipated her errors and prepared the client with subtle clarifications, ensuring the project proceeded smoothly despite her oversight. The murmurs among employees were noticeable, yet she remained unaware of my interventions. By the time the presentation ended, her confidence had been dented, though she tried to mask it. Watching her scramble to cover minor mistakes, I felt a quiet satisfaction. For the first time, she realized that success wasn't just about boldness or charm. It was about preparation, observation, and understanding people. I did not gloat or intervene overtly. I let her missteps speak for themselves. That night, I reviewed the day's events with my allies, noting what had worked, what needed reinforcement, and where Vanessa's arrogance was most vulnerable. Each small victory reinforced a strategy, patience, ethics, and observation. The storm she had initiated was starting to unravel. Quietly but decisively, I could see the pattern emerging. Her ego would betray her further, and every action I had taken so far would build to a decisive, morally satisfying payoff. The family dinner became another battlefield. Vanessa attempted to assert dominance by criticizing old employees and subtly undermining me in front of Marlene. My heart ached, but I held my composure, responding with calm, pointed questions that highlighted her misjudgments. Marlene's silence was deafening. The complicity I had feared seemed real. Yet Vanessa's facade began to crack as her arrogance collided with reality. Small, honest observations from loyal staff and subtle reminders of her past mistakes undermined her carefully crafted image. The tension at the table was electric. I spoke softly but firmly, demonstrating a quiet authority that could not be dismissed. Vanessa flinched at my words, though she tried to maintain a confident posture. That night, I reflected on the emotional impact of betrayal and its intersection with strategy. My allies confirmed that patience, moral clarity, and consistent observation had begun to shift perceptions. Vanessa's influence was starting to falter quietly. I realized then that every display of arrogance she made now fed directly into the web of her own downfall. The battle was far from over, but the tide had started to turn, and the sense of satisfaction, though quiet, was unmistakable. I sought counsel from a retired mentor who had faced similar betrayals decades earlier. His study smelled of old leather and ink, the room lined with reminders of hard-earned victories. I laid out the situation, describing Vanessa's audacious takeover and my wife's subtle complicity. The mentor listened intently, then nodded. "Harvey," he said, "the strongest victories are calculated. Observe, influence subtly, and wait for the natural consequences of arrogance. The impatient always falter." His words reinforced my strategy. I left invigorated, recognizing that the slow, methodical approach I had begun was not only ethical, but inevitable in success. Returning to the office, I reviewed each board member's loyalty, noting their hesitations and concerns. The groundwork for my subtle reclamation was solidifying. Vanessa, in her arrogance, had no idea that every misstep, every impulsive decision, and every oversight was feeding into a future where she would have no control. The satisfaction lay not in confrontation, but in the careful orchestration of ethical and inevitable consequences. She believed she was racing ahead. In reality, she was navigating a labyrinth constructed by her own hubris. Patience and clarity would ensure her eventual undoing, and the empire I had built would remain intact, stronger than before. I observed Vanessa's next project attempt with precision. She aimed to secure a high-value client, boasting confidence to the board. I noted her mistakes, overpromising, ignoring subtle client hesitations, and relying solely on charisma. During the negotiations, I subtly intervened, offering clarifications that protected the client and preserved the company's reputation without exposing her errors. Employees began whispering about her misjudgments, though she remained oblivious. By the end of the week, the pattern was clear. Her arrogance was eroding trust among those she thought loyal. I documented each detail, preparing for the critical phase of my strategy. The thrill of anticipation was immense. She had underestimated both my patience and my allies' loyalty. Every small error she made, every overstep, was feeding into a larger, carefully orchestrated plan. By allowing her to make these mistakes without confrontation, I maintained moral authority while quietly reclaiming control. The first major turning point was forming, invisible to her but undeniable to those who understood the stakes. Patience, subtle influence, and ethical strategy were now the pillars of her impending downfall. Vanessa seemed to regain momentum, securing a temporary victory in a client negotiation that had appeared beyond her reach. Her confidence surged, and she smiled triumphantly in board meetings, assuming she had outmaneuvered me. My heart beat faster, not with fear, but with anticipation. I had been expecting this, and it was the perfect moment to reveal a long-concealed observation. A trusted insider had uncovered inconsistencies in her records, mistakes that could jeopardize her credibility if exposed. I began quietly preparing a reveal, careful to maintain discretion while ensuring maximum impact. Vanessa's overconfidence blinded her to the slow, methodical correction forming around her. By the end of the week, she believed she had regained control, unaware that her arrogance had set the stage for a more significant and unavoidable collapse. Every time she thought victory was within reach, the carefully orchestrated consequences of her actions moved silently toward fruition. The suspense was almost unbearable, and I relished it, knowing that the final reckoning would be both morally righteous and emotionally satisfying. The evidence from the insider revealed that Vanessa had misrepresented critical facts in her financial reports. I studied the documents carefully, ensuring absolute accuracy. Every discrepancy, every misleading entry was cataloged. The opportunity was perfect. A confidential meeting with board members allowed me to present the inconsistencies subtly, letting the facts speak for themselves. Vanessa, oblivious, continued her daily routines, unaware of the storm gathering. The tension in the office grew, though she could not yet identify its source. By the evening, her anxiety was palpable, masked behind forced confidence. My heart raced with cautious excitement. Each step she had taken in arrogance, each overconfident decision, now contributed to a cascading series of consequences. I had remained calm, strategic, and ethical throughout, ensuring that my reclamation authority was entirely justified. The slow, deliberate buildup of tension was now reaching its critical phase, with Vanessa's downfall edging closer with every passing hour. The long game was paying off. I used the next week to quietly consolidate my position, meetings with key employees, subtle guidance, and discreet reassurances strengthened my influence without revealing direct intervention. Vanessa's desperation grew, though she continued to project confidence. Minor missteps now became more frequent as her arrogance collided with reality. A small error in a client report, left unnoticed by her, became a crucial pivot point in my strategy. Employees who had previously hesitated began aligning with me, their loyalty quietly reshaping the balance of power. By the weekend, I had ensured that every key decision was influenced by my ethical guidance, preserving the company's integrity while allowing Vanessa to make the final mistakes that would seal her fate. Her overconfidence was her undoing, and I was ready for control reveal that would demonstrate both her failures and my moral authority. The tide had turned, though she remained oblivious. Patience, observation, and careful strategy had begun delivering results. I felt the satisfaction of anticipation, knowing that the final confrontation was approaching, but still far enough in the future for maximum effect. The final setup began quietly but with absolute precision. I scheduled a board meeting, making sure every key employee and investor was present. Vanessa believed she could use this gathering to demonstrate control, to showcase her victory over me. I arrived calmly, my demeanor collected, my mind racing through every detail I had prepared over months. As the meeting began, she started her presentation, confident, polished, and unaware of the subtle interventions I had orchestrated. One by one, employees and allies presented facts and corrections, not as attacks, but as clarifications, revealing the flaws in her plan, without a single accusation from me. The room shifted, subtle murmurs rising. Vanessa's smile faltered as she realized something was wrong. She tried to regain control, offering justifications and charm, but the evidence spoke louder than words. Her overconfidence collided with reality. My heart pounded, not with anger, but with anticipation. Every carefully laid step, every patient observation, every loyal ally's quiet support culminated here. I remained calm, letting the process unfold naturally. By the end of the meeting, the balance of power had shifted entirely. Though Vanessa still did not fully understand how she had been outmaneuvered, the emotional reckoning came later that evening. I found Vanessa and Marlene in the family room, tension thick in the air. Marlene had witnessed the board meeting, and for the first time, I saw clarity in her eyes. She no longer defended her daughter. Vanessa attempted to appeal emotionally, to persuade her mother that she was right, that I had overreacted. I listened quietly, letting her words hang in the air, knowing the truth would speak louder than her arguments. Marlene finally spoke, choosing loyalty and reason over blind maternal indulgence. Vanessa's face paled as she realized she was truly alone. The arrogance that had carried her this far crumbled into panic and disbelief. I felt a mixture of sorrow and satisfaction, recognizing that the betrayal had forced a reckoning not just in business, but in family dynamics. She had gambled on charm and entitlement and lost. The long game I had orchestrated, the patient observation and subtle influence, had reached its penultimate point. Vanessa was beginning to understand, though bitterly, that she had misjudged me, misread the loyalty of others, and underestimated the power of integrity combined with strategy. By the time the night ended, she was left to face consequences she could not undo, while I quietly prepared for the final act. Triumph began in the quiet moments that followed. I resumed control fully, the company responding to my leadership with renewed confidence. Employees and allies celebrated subtly, respecting the dignity of the process. Vanessa attempted one final subtle sabotage, a small misstep designed to disrupt operations, but I had anticipated it. The evidence of her own errors was already documented and undeniable. By addressing it calmly and professionally, I exposed her mistake without dramatics, reinforcing my authority. The sense of satisfaction was deep but measured. My victory was moral, strategic, and absolute. Every miscalculation she had made now contributed to her undoing, yet I maintained integrity throughout. The empire I had built, nurtured, and defended over decades was secure. My patience had transformed anger into triumph. Vanessa, realizing futility of further attempts, began to withdraw, her confidence shattered. I watched, quiet and composed, as the consequences of her arrogance unfolded fully. By remaining patient, ethical, and calculated, I had not only reclaimed my empire, but had also preserved the loyalty, respect, and trust of those who mattered most. The long, careful game had succeeded beyond my initial hopes. Justice was complete when investors, clients, and employees publicly affirmed confidence in my leadership. Vanessa's reputation within the company and the industry had been quietly undermined by her own actions, documented mistakes, and my strategic interventions. Her arrogance had created a narrative of failure that she could no longer control. Each misstep she had taken over months, every impulsive decision, had compounded into a visible, undeniable downfall. I observed from the sidelines, letting her face the consequences naturally, without gloating, without vindictiveness. The moral clarity of the situation brought a profound sense of satisfaction. Vanessa had attempted to steal my empire, believing charm, influence, and entitlement would carry her forward. Instead, her own overconfidence and impatience dismantled her ambitions. I reflected on the journey, the betrayal, the observation, the patience, and finally, the controlled resolution. Every step had been deliberate, ethical, and strategically sound. By allowing consequences to unfold while quietly guiding outcomes, I had achieved the most satisfying victory, justice without compromise. Vanessa's pride was shattered, my authority restored, and the company stronger for the trials it had endured. The arc of betrayal I completed, and the lesson was undeniable. Patience, integrity, and strategy always triumph over arrogance. I stood in the office I had built from the ground up, reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal by my daughter, the complicity of my wife, the subtle resistance of loyal employees, and the months of patient strategy had all led to this moment. My empire was intact, stronger and more resilient than ever. Vanessa had left the company, defeated but unharmed, facing the consequences of her actions. The satisfaction was profound, not born of malice, but of moral and strategic triumph. I addressed my team, quietly reinforcing trust, loyalty, and shared purpose. The lessons were clear. Arrogance is self-defeating, loyalty cannot be forced, and integrity combined with patience is unstoppable. I had not only reclaimed my empire, but had grown stronger, wiser, and more respected in every way. Vanessa's miscalculation had been her undoing, and I had emerged victorious on my own terms, a measured, ethical, and complete triumph.